Fairbanks Focus Alaska View is brought to you by the University of Alaska Fairbanks, Alaska's first university, and the Fairbanks Economic Development Corporation, bringing economic development to interior Alaska.
Welcome to the Roundtable. Joining me today are Representative Tammy Wilson and, of course, economist Ed King. We're going to have a conversation, no surprise, about energy, about gas to Fairbanks, the Susitna Dam, Eielson Air Force Base. We'll probably talk about air quality, and we'll most certainly touch on politics. So let's begin. Tammy, you've been in the legislature now for a few years. You're getting used to the legislative process. This was an interesting session. Talk to us about what happened with regard to energy and how that's going to affect Fairbanks. I think people are most concerned with that.
Oh, absolutely. I hear from people every day about their energy costs, from heating their homes all the way to their electric bills. And we were able to put some good legislation forward, not as much as we had hoped to. But we did put $3.75 million toward an LNG, which could help GVA with our electric cost.
Okay, when you say LNG, that's the
liquefied natural gas.
Right, liquefied natural gas, but it was to study and help with the engineering component of that project.
Right, all the things that need to be done so that they'll be able to hopefully begin to build as early as even possibly next year.
Right.
And so that's kind of one piece of a short-term part of it. However, the gas line, which I think is very important to Fairbanks, whether it goes through Fairbanks or goes around Fairbanks, we can figure out once gas gets within 100 miles how we get it from that spot into Fairbanks. And for me, that was the frustration, is that it seemed that we got caught up in how far away it was and which way it was going versus how do we get it closer to us, because right now we don't have that.
Sure.
And without it, you know, we're going to have to use wood or coal or oil like we currently are, and it kind of goes into our air quality. So our energy costs and our air quality issues are tied together. You can't really split them apart from each other.
Sure.
But I have heard from more and more people who are picking up and leaving, or saying, I have one more year, I'm going to try to make it. But if oil stays up over $4 a gallon and our electric bills continue to be over, the average was over $300 from those that I heard of, it just really doesn't make it affordable as much as we love to live here.
Right. I'd like to have a $300 average oil bill. I think many of us would.
That was electric. Oil's worse.
Oh, that was electric.
That was electric.
Okay, that sounds...
Oil's probably more like $500,
I would
versus the other.
I would guess even more than that.
Well, the first time I think what I heard from my office was that people who put their home heating and their electric bills together was more than their mortgage.
Yeah.
And we had, you know, I had not heard that before.
I'm one of them.
And I think you're in the majority, and that's where, you know, we can't just sit around and just wait for things to happen.
Yeah, it hurts. Something has to be done. And that was pretty much the mandate over the course of the last couple of years. But I think what that points out is how complex delivering energy to a community is. It's not a simple solution. There is no easy, quick fix. Do you agree with that?
Well, absolutely, because, you know, we're less than 100,000 people, and think how many plants we have. We have one on the university, Eielson, Fort Wainwright. You have GVA that has theirs, you know, for the electricity generating, and then you have Aurora. I just came back from Wisconsin to tour a coal plant as well as a biomass plant, and they were amazed that we have 5 different types of power plants for such a small population. Sure. And that's why things start costing. You start doing and penciling out the economics, it's because we don't have the population to make the numbers come out that's economical. But if we don't do something, we'll never get the numbers, because people can't afford to put businesses in. They can't afford to, you know, move here from a lot lower, you know, cost. So it's kind of, you just spin your wheels if you're really waiting for all the numbers to come out to say private, you know, companies can make money off of this. Right now, we have to make sure that our residents can afford to stay here, and then the growth will continue. And if you want an example of that, you can look right at Anchorage. If Anchorage didn't have natural gas at the price they do, they would be relatively the same size as we are, but they've been able to grow because they can afford to.
Sure, sure.
Go ahead. One of the concerns or talking points, I guess, with this whole discussion on energy costs and delivering energy at an affordable price to the community is that the free market will just take care of it. If there's a solution out there and there's profits to be made, why isn't the market doing it? So do you kind of feel like that's the mentality that we need to adopt, or is there a state way, a way that the public entities can help, spur on that investment? Is that a role that the government should take on?
In most cases, I would disagree with that, but because the government already got involved, the gas that you see in Anchorage right now was done because of tax credits and other opportunities that was given to Anchorage. Even right now, the jackup rigs that are there was by a new tax credit. The storage tank that they were able to build was by a Cook Inlet one. So now that the government decided to jump into it, if we wait for private to do it, we do not have the population to make the numbers come out. And the only way those numbers are going to come out, in my opinion, is to be able to do that. Now, does that mean we subsidize it and the state builds the whole thing? I would rather see a private-public partnership so that both groups are in the game, and we know that it has to be paid back. But if we think our residents, if you take out the military bases and just our own population, nothing as far as numbers will ever be able to come out.
Sure. We have long, cold, dark winters that require a lot of energy, and we have a relatively small population. That's something we have to accept, and then there are manifestations with regard to the economics of that. And a strictly private sector endeavor probably isn't going to work for us. We're going to have to work together, government, private sector, and community support in order to deal up our energy problem in Fairbanks. This is not new. I've been here a long time, and it has been an issue as long as I've been here.
Well, when we even talked about HB 9, the discussions, it even came up on your permanent fund.
HB 9 is the in-state gas pipeline bill.
Sometimes you get caught in the legislature and
Sure,
you forget that everybody doesn't know what it is. But
of course.
The question was even brought up, how many people, because we already have a box that we can check for nonprofits, how many people would check that box and say, my dividend, and I want it to go toward a gas line to get to Fairbanks. Mm-hmm. First of all, people were kind of joking about it, and as they started thinking about it, that's not a silly idea. Right. Why not put some of our own money? And even the permanent fund itself, at this point, is not investing in anything in Alaska. And so that really worries me that whatever formula they have, our own should be able to somehow fit in that. And thus far it doesn't. And so we collect money kind of in a savings account versus putting into infrastructure that will help us grow, and that money can go back into it.
Right. I couldn't agree more with that. Ed and I have had that conversation now for a couple of years. Why don't we invest some of the billions of dollars that we collectively have as the state of Alaska into the state of Alaska? Why do we invest in foreign countries and the lower 48? Why don't we invest here? Of course, remaining prudent, but really that's a legislative decision. And I know you've got a tough nut to crack there, because the pushback that you will get from the fund managers and the former bankers who run the Permanent Fund Corporation will be, hey, wait a minute, we've got to spread our risk. We can't, Alaska is a risky place to invest. What the hell kind of a message is that to the people that we want to come here and invest if we won't invest in ourselves?
And I think that's absolutely the message that we're sending. And why not cap it? And we are looking into, does it need to be a statute change? Do we need to change the law to say 10% or a certain portion of that needs to be invested in Alaska? Because again, we understand the bankers, it's all about numbers for them.
Sure.
And the risk. Well, at some point, you have to take a chance on your own.
Right.
Because if you don't, what do we have here?
And I don't think anybody would recommend investing the $40 billion corpus of the Permanent Fund in a risky project in Alaska, but some component of the Permanent Fund in not risky projects, but projects that absolutely benefit Alaska. Why wouldn't we do that?
Well, so people understand there's a portion that they're investing, and then you have a portion you get your dividend on. So we're not talking about touching anyone's dividend. We know that that's sacred. We understand that. Yeah. But as we're investing the other portion of it, that also that return could go back in. We can bond the project. We can have a low-interest loan to be able to. There are so many options out there versus just utilize the money, put it into the project with no return whatsoever.
Sure.
And so, I want to make sure people realize that that is their duty to do. But at some point, we have to realize that if we want others to come and put their money into us, we have to show them that we're willing to do it as well.
Okay.
So you're talking about, we're talking about $40 or $50 billion that we have in separate bank accounts throughout the state. 30 or 35 or so is in the permanent fund. But the permanent fund, we're not talking about spending that money and subsidizing a project. We're talking about investing in that project where you're going to get that return back on the money. The money's going to go back into that fund it's going to get paid for, by the sale of the gas or whatever it is that we're using. But basically, all you're talking about is having the permanent fund dividend corporation purchase the bonds that are buying that infrastructure, not just giving that money away.
Right. Instead of investing in foreclosed homes, which is my understanding they're doing next.
Sure. In the lower 48.
In the lower 48, of course. So instead of taking advantage of those who had a bad situation, why not take that same amount of money and invest in us?
And make damn sure we don't have that bad situation.
There you go. And
okay.
What message does that send to everybody else of, what Alaskan feels about Alaskans?
Sure.
So right now what we have is, if we were going to bond a project, we would be flying to New York or California to be selling bonds to other investors while our own money is being invested in other places outside the state. That's kind of the point you're making.
Right.
Right. Well, so let's wrap up the energy discussion. There were some bills that were passed. SB 25, SB 23. SB 23 was the gas storage bill, and that came in the last couple of hours of the session, which is not uncommon in Juneau. It was a good idea that was held hostage, and finally I think there was some decision made in the Senate that, all right, it's a good bill, let's put it in this other deal and move it on. Is that kind of sort of what happened?
Right, we put kind of all the tax credits, because that's what it is. It's a tax credit, just like the film is a tax credit, so are the storage units.
Right.
And that equaled us out with the Cook Inlet, which also had that. And F&G, Fairbanks Natural Gas, is now going to build a bigger storage unit because of that, and hopefully be able to take care of the university and the hospital, which right now, when the cold weather comes, they don't have enough gas for it. So right now, this next year, we should see an improvement of that. And that was very important, not just to us, but when a gas line gets put down, then you can also take care of Delta and Glen Allen and those areas that maybe the pipeline doesn't go directly by, but we would be able to have a place for the storage in all those smaller towns and even possibly out into the rural areas.
Sure. It's infrastructure. You've got to be able to store gas to use it if you don't have a pipeline that runs by you on a daily basis.
Correct.
So that was a good piece of legislation. I was delighted. I was pleased. I had given up hope that that was going to be part of it as I was watching the session closed, and then bang, it came in, passed. Done deal. Good work.
Well, we wanted to make sure you didn't turn the TV off, We wanted to show you that we were working up to the last, hour.
Yeah, I occasionally not only turn the TV off, but throw something at it. But having been there, I know how things work, and it's frustrating as heck. And sometimes
it turned out to be a very excellent bill.
Yeah, it was.
And it is now signed in.
Yep. It is law.
Absolutely.
The other one was SB 25. And that was the bill that I think Liesl McGuire was the real driver behind that, Senator Liesl McGuire. And she wanted to ensure that there was essentially a revolving energy loan fund.
Right.
And I think that's a good piece of legislation as well, because if an energy project, including LNG, trucked gas, which I think looms large in Fairbanks' near-term future, funds will be available for that kind of a project. At a reasonable rate.
Correct.
Yeah.
And it also gives us the opportunity to go with a loan and possibly a grant, where right now you're going to have to go to, the Energy Authority and AEA and have them give you a grant, which is free money. And what we'd like to do on those major projects, it might need to be a combination, but doesn't necessarily have to be a grant. They can afford a loan, it just needs to be at a better interest. And this will open it up, hopefully not just to Fairbanks, but to other areas that are struggling. Because as much as we're complaining, and we have every right, our bills are extremely high, we also have to realize that the bush communities have been fighting this issue for a very long time, and probably are double what we see there. And so it's not just a Fairbanks issue. And we need to realize that, especially when we go down to Juneau, that other communities, the Matsu, they're on oil, a lot of them up there, and to take our energies together and go forward and say, it's wonderful that Anchorage has gas. Now, what do we do in these areas? Because otherwise we're just going to subsidize other programs and not have any true capital. And that's what changes things, is capital projects in infrastructure, so that every year you're fixing the problem, not just delaying and costs go up.
Sure, making it sustainable and building economies. There's nothing wrong with that. In fact,
I think that's what we're supposed to do.
That is what indeed Alaska should be doing. And I think that the desperate situation that we're in now with regard to the cost of energy is really pushing us in that direction. I think we're making progress. I'm delighted with some of the work that was done in this last legislative session. The last piece of energy legislation that passed was a continuation of significant funding for the Susitna Dam project. Talk a little bit about that.
Well, the Susitna Dam is just another piece of the pie, for hydro that we're able to do. But we also have to remember we have to have the infrastructure. Once we build the dam, the interties, the lines that bring it up are very old. In fact, Anchorage has had some issues with them and bought power from Fairbanks last year at our extreme high cost because of those issues.
Yeah,
So,
we're okay with that.
I'm sure we're okay with that, but if we're waiting to be able to get some of that hydropower, it has to come up those same lines.
Sure.
And, I think it's great that we have more money, but I think for Fairbanks, we need to realize that we have alternative ideas. We know right now that the university, their power plant, has some major issues just keeping it going.
It's old.
It's old, and so we hate to say it, but sometimes you can fix old things and sometimes you have to replace them. So we need to be looking right now, do we build just a power plant for the university, or do we look at the rest of Fairbanks and say, can we build a power plant that can help us all in our need? Again, we are a very small population, and that's what's amazing. When I went to Wisconsin, I went to Milwaukee to see their brand new coal plant, just put online right on Lake Michigan, a coal plant. All the nasty things that we hear. And when they heard the size that we are and how many power plants we have, they were completely amazed. They're like, their one could power the entire state.
Sure.
And so we know that the state's going to be the primary lender or build the one at the university. How much more would it cost to help lower the cost for everybody versus build just one? And then is it coal? How long is it going to take for us to fight all these groups to be able to do? It took them 5 years just in lawsuits. We can't wait that long. Or do we look at the biomass and the pellets and those alternatives and combine it together, because the university is one of those learning institutions, and therefore you would think that this would be a perfect opportunity to look at some of the wonderful technology that's out there right now and be able to utilize that, because I think it's all those little things. Biomass plants for the ones that work using wood chips like they do in Tok, or using pellets like we're going to have a pellet one in Tickasick Brown. Or we use coal, that we have a lot of it here. But back to one type is not going to work for our area. And if we're going to sit and wait for Juneau to solve our problem, you've been there. Do you want to count on our own to solve the problem, or Juneau?
Sure.
Well, for me, I trust our community a lot more.
Well, but having said that, you still have to, if you want state funding, you have to work with the other people from around the state.
Absolutely.
And I think that I agree with you, there are energy solutions. We need to push for them, and here's the deal. Again, I've been here a long time.
Yes, sir.
You've been here a long time now. We're making progress, but the talking at some point has to stop and the doing has to start. And Susitna Dam is a good example of what is now being done rather than talked about.
Correct.
The gas storage is a good example of that as well. We're actually doing something. The funding for other energy projects in SB 25, that is doing something. You can't do anything except talk about it unless you have funding. That funding right now comes from this legislation that was passed in Juneau. That's all good stuff. And I think now if we take advantage of that, we can deal up our energy problems.
And that's a perfect point, because the university will be the big one. I believe we will deal with this next year. It's my understanding that if something doesn't get off the ground, it's going to cost approximately $40 million just to keep everything working the way it is. So I think it's going to be critical, because it can't be anything that's going to take long for study. We're going to have to make the decision on what is that plant going to be. And luckily, I think having some of these bills that we passed might even give the opportunity that gas might be a solution for the university if, all these other pieces come together. But you're right. We tend to think of the moment, and the moment is okay, but it's those years out that we've kind of dropped. Same thing with the Susitna Dam. If we had gone through with it when it was first discussed, we probably wouldn't be sitting here talking about how high our energy bills are.
I suspect we would not.
Take that big step and work toward it, and quit looking at how oil prices does or does not make the project. We know oil will go up. It may go down and then go up again, and that's why seeing the Susitna going and keep going is so important to not just our community, but the entire state to get there.
You're right. So let's move from energy to Eielson. That's another tough subject for us here in the interior. As you know, in 2005, we came through a BRAC situation, base realignment and closure situation. We were successful coming out of that to some extent, but now we're back visiting the same subject.
Right.
What do you think is going to happen, Tammy?
This situation is actually a lot worse. You know, with being the F-16s, we talked to Representative Young, had lunch with him, and it is my understanding that they're going. You know, that it's all about manpower, whether manpower is going to go down because of it. I also, well, of course it is if you put all the planes together. He also told us at the time it was because also they're burning coal versus using other resources was one reason that we were doing. But what we have to remember is that these airmen have had no opportunity. In a BRAC, they get a lot of help in selling their homes and moving.
Sure.
When this happens, they get none of that. So if they have bought homes in our community, which there's a lot of houses for sale right now, they could end up taking a lot of losses. And basically, we were told a house that runs about $240,000 here in Anchorage is like $350,000. So they're not just going to not be able to probably sell their house quickly or for an amount that they need. They're going to go into a higher market on top of it all with absolutely no help here. And you know, that's the part of it we need to remember. And there's also exciting projects out there. I don't want us to lose sight that, yes, we want to fight for the F-16s. If there's any way we can keep them here, we want to keep them here. But if we can't, we have the unmanned space, the drones that we have the airspace for. We also have, you know, rockets and other types of things that we're looking at in other areas in Kodiak and possibly into Greeley. What else can we use it for as a community? Because we do have airspace that no one else has. How do we get those projects here? There is money going toward, I believe $5 million was put toward that so that we go forward. So as we're fighting one side, we got to remember that we do have a very special asset that we need to make sure that gets filled.
Yes, we do. Tough fight, and it is because the decisions are made in Washington, D.C. It is a federal asset, federal budget. They're going to deal with their issues in a manner that they think they need to.
Absolutely.
We do have some influence. Certainly we have a strong congressional delegation, and what I found years past is that the Pentagon does listen to local people, and they do, particularly in this case, because there is airspace involved that they want for training grounds in the future. If they think there's some risk to those from local people and the opposition that could grow as a result of closing Eielson and still keeping the airspace, then there's a problem. They recognize that, and so state and local officials and a local population do have influence with the Pentagon. We shouldn't forget that.
And I think everybody on every level is fighting that. I know on a local level they are. The state put $300,000 plus more into also fighting that. I just want to make sure that we're doing it on both ends, that we're fighting to keep the F-16s here, but at the same time, we're going to make sure that it's not empty either. You know, we're just going to sit back and take it. I'll give it to the federal government. They switched it from Alaska to Alaska, and they look at us and say, well, it's not a loss. You still have it in your state.
That's right.
And that's true, but at the same time, we also know with the plane traffic and everything else that they have down in Anchorage, they don't have some of the things that we have up here just because of the difference of the location. And we can't forget that that is an asset that very few communities, you know, in the United States can offer.
Okay. Quickly, let's touch on politics. This is an election year, new districts. You're in a new district. This is an election year. Your thoughts on the political picture as it lays in front of you?
Well, it's been interesting. My house, although I didn't move, people kept asking me why I moved. So, you know, I didn't move. The lines moved, and so I am now in the new District 2. And so I did keep a little bit of the Badger Road, but now I go from Badger Road all the way out to the borders. I have Two Rivers, Haystack, down Farmers Loop down to Auburn, as well as Fox. So I kind of went from like about this to about this, and I'm excited. I don't know how you felt when you campaigned. I mean,
I hated every minute of it, to tell you the truth.
I love going door to door because it's people's opportunity that I think a lot of people always want to do. They always, you know, have that question in the back of their mind, and for some reason they don't have time or they don't get to it. But this is their time to tell me what they think, and sometimes it's good, sometimes not so good. But you know, if you're not willing to put yourself out there and ask those questions, how do I know what decisions to make down there?
Sure.
Because it is about them. It's not about what I want to have happen. It's what's necessary for them. And the area, in the North Pole area, to the area that I'm going into, the needs are very, very similar. They're very residential areas. Schools are important to them. And so I don't think as far as, you know, the area goes that they're going to differ in what they want to see us do down there. It's going to be about energy. It's going to be about jobs, keeping Alaskans working here and keeping our revenues going the way they are. And right now, I think a lot of them are just struggling, and that's the thing that we need to look at more than anything else.
Sure. All right. Well, good luck as you move forward. Ed, any closing comments?
No, not today, thanks.
Well, you can ask that one compelling question if you have it. If not,
You'll be in my district, I'll knock on your door, and you'll have to come up with it
I'll
then.
talk to you then.
all right. Well, that does it. Thank you, Tammy, for being
Thank you.
with us. Ed, as always, thank you. And that does it for us this week. Thanks for joining us. See you next week. Until then, all the best.